what do you do once you're there? I mean, it was like a horror story when you get on the ground there. So how do you just fly into a place and start making TV? There isn't a procedure per se. The job of a producer really is to troubleshoot and to do whatever it takes to get the story on air. Haiti's a really good example of that. I've spent a lot of time in Haiti. As you know, there was a massive earthquake January last year, and about 300,000 people died. And my team and I were the very first people to get there in terms of journalists, actually in terms of pretty much anyone, shockingly. We got there less than 24 hours after the earthquake happened. And I then spent the following month there reporting on the aftermath. And since then, I've been back 8 times, I think. I get assigned a story to work with a correspondent and a photographer. And I, first of all, figure out what the story is. We got off the plane onto the tarmac in the airport in Haiti. And it was eerily silent. And so we start getting all our equipment. And then I realized that the Prime Minister's there. And so I speak French, which is very useful in Haiti because that's the main language. So we went and we started talking to the Prime Minister, started interviewing him. And we said to him, well, what's the damage like? How bad is it? And he said, well, I think there are going to be hundreds of thousands of dead people. And we went, hundreds of thousands? I mean, that's really a lot. Do you mean thousands? Do you mean hundreds? He said, no, hundreds of thousands. And I asked him this probably 9 times in English, in French, just to make sure that we weren't getting some kind of miscommunication. And then I got out my satellite phone and called the control room and got the Prime Minister to do a live interview with the anchor. This was the first interview he'd done. This was the first interview anyone had got with an official from Haiti. And he again said hundreds of thousands. And after that interview, I got a call from headquarters saying, did he misspeak? Did he say hundreds of thousands? That can't be right. I said, no, we've been through this, hundreds of thousands. No one could believe it, but it turned out he was absolutely right. And as soon as we left the airport, it was pretty evident. But in order to leave the airport, we just showed up. We didn't have a car waiting for us. We didn't have a hotel to go to. We didn't have a generator. There's no, Wi-Fi. And so one of the best things in journalism is to talk to everybody. Talk to as many people as you can. So we're there at the airport, and the Prime Minister already told us that we were the first people to land. There hadn't been any emergency workers coming in, there hadn't been any aid. We were it. And I saw this guy who was about 7 feet tall in a military uniform with lots and lots of stripes and stars and things. So I thought, I don't know who he is, but he's probably quite important. So I went over to talk to him. And he was the head of police at the airport. And he said to me, well, so what are you going to do now? And I said, well, we're going to try and find a way to get into town. He said, well, you can rent a car. I said, really? Because I was kind of imagining that things might not be really working like normal. He said, yeah, rent a car. I said, okay. So we went out the front of the airport, and I did actually find the car rental place, and it was intact. But of course it was locked because, you're not going to show up to work at Hertz when your family's dead. So I went and I found the chief of police again and said, can you help me? I need to get a car. And because of who he was, he could find the guy who had the key to unlock the door so I could get the car. So I rented cars for all our different teams, and we needed drivers because we don't know where we're going. And in a place like that, when you hire a driver, you really depend on them for more than just driving, because you don't know where to go. You need them to help you figure out where to go. So there were a bunch of guys hanging out in front of the airport, sort of waiting for something. And I talked to a few of them, and you have to make a very quick judgment decision about who you can trust and who's going to give you what you need. So I hired a few drivers, and we all started heading out to do what we could. And so, we hadn't gone down the road more than 2 minutes before we saw that, with the dead bodies just piling up and piling up. And it's funny what you get used to, because I'd never really seen a dead body before. I had one or two, but always kind of sterile. And so I'm standing in the street in Haiti, and I see my first bloated, smelling, rotting corpse. And then within 5 minutes, I've seen 50 of them. And so it goes from the shock of seeing your first mutilated corpse to hardly even noticing them anymore, because it's just piles of them. It got to the point where there were traffic jams caused by the piles of bodies that were mounting up. So one of the next decisions I had to make as a producer was how much time were we going to spend out filming, out trying to see what the situation was, and filming those things we filmed before cutting off and trying to actually go and get that video on air. And the way we got things on air was with a BGAN, which is our little portable satellite dish.
It's the worst devastation I've ever seen. This is worse than any horror movie you've ever seen. You can see here people looking for bodies of loved ones who are missing. And as we were just walking past, we see bodies that are under the rocks that are obviously lifeless. But what is horrifying is on the other side of the street, they've tried their best to give people killed some respect by putting sheets on top of their bodies. But this street is covered with people who died in the earthquake, and there's been nobody here to recover the bodies. Perhaps, though, the most worrisome thing, and the thing that concerns me the most, and the thing that's upsetting the most, is what's happening back here. And it's the search for possible survivors. There's not one rescue worker here, not one emergency worker, and most importantly, no equipment. People are digging by hand. One man says he heard noises, but there's no way to lift up these heavy rocks. There's no way to lift up this heavy concrete if there's someone who's trapped, who's alive. What's so scary and horrifying as we walk down the street and see children who walk by these bodies and look so frightened when they see the bodies. And one thing rescue workers here are telling us, and the rescue workers are the civilians, like we said, but they're looking for the flies and the insects. You see the children as they're walking by, they're walking fast, their mother's shielding them, but they're looking anyway. But what the people here are looking for are flies. They say when flies fly over here, there may be survivors or human remains. You hear some excitement right here, but it's not because they've seen the body, it's because there's some argument going on about how to proceed with the search for people. But the sight here, the smells here are just unbelievable. This is just a situation that you can never possibly imagine that nobody should ever have to endure. This is one of the most beautiful parts of Port-au-Prince, and that's because this is where the presidential palace is. And this exemplifies this disaster. Look at what has happened to this beautiful building in the heart of downtown Port-au-Prince, destroyed from this earthquake. And the area surrounding here normally has a lot of tourists, a lot of Haitians, like Americans who come to the White House to look through the gates of the White House. But most of the people here are now temporarily homeless, because most of the homes here in downtown Port-au-Prince have been destroyed. And across the street, basically it has become a campsite. Not only are people here because they no longer have homes, but people are very scared about the aftershocks and afraid if they do go in a structure that has just been damaged, that it can be destroyed. People don't want to go indoors, and that's why they're staying outdoors. Yes. This is the third floor of a school. It's for small children during the day, continuing education for adults in the late afternoon and evening. Adults were in this classroom when the earthquake happened. You can see by just looking at the chairs and the handbags and the books how quickly people had to escape. The people inside this room survived, but the people in the other section of the school just on this side, many of them did not. You can see the rubble, the open wall right here, and we see several bodies that are down there right now.
The reason that I do what I do is because I really believe that people need to know what is the reality of life for all the people we share the world with, because, you know, if we're not the ones who find ourselves living in the middle of a civil war or an earthquake or some other disaster, you know, a lot of that's just sheer luck, and it's part of the human experience, and I think we can all learn from it, and that we should all have as much information as possible in order to make our decisions about how we're going to live our lives.